please switch off your webcam and your microphone. If you want to comment or ask any questions, please use the chat function. We are monitoring the chat, so we are reading what you write, and we will incorporate your comments and questions best we can. It's 11 o'clock now, and the recording has started. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here for a conversation on decolonization with Nyanchama Okemwa. This part is a University Human Rights Week, organized by the UGent Human Rights Research Network. We're really proud to have as our guest for this conversation, Nyanchama, who has long been engaged in decolonization efforts. She's been engaging in policy, activism, community building, working behind the scenes. And we are, as I just said, really proud to have her as our guest today, and also tomorrow for the roundtable on decolonizing Ghent University.
Thank you.
Welcome. We envisioned this talk as a kind of, and not to sound disrespectful at all, as a kind of decolonization for dummies. So our questions will become slightly more advanced and intricate as we go along, but just 4 basic questions to start with, if you don't mind, Nyanchama.
Yeah.
Now, before we start, actually, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Well, yes. So my name is Nyanchama Okemwa. I am originally from Kenya, but I've lived in Belgium for more than 30 years. My background is education and anthropology, but I do have more than 30 years experience in activism, in Afrofeminism, in defending human rights. So I have a fair share of experience in these sectors. In the organization where I work, hand in hand, we launched the theme decolonization 4 years ago, and we're still working on it. So this is really my expertise, I should say. Thank you.
Okay. Now let's start off pretty basically, because decolonization is a term that we hear often. But what is it really about? If you had to summarize it in just a few words, how would you define decolonization?
Well, decolonization. There are very many people who link decolonization with a geopolitical decolonization and of colonization, and that may be true indeed. But our understanding, our take on the term decolonization is the mindset, the brainwashing, the propaganda that was used to insert that colonial ideology. Is precisely what we mean by decolonization. That mindset, that ideology to dehumanize the other for the purpose of benefiting from them was the same mindset that was used here in the West to insert a false sense of superiority, a false sense of entitlement to take advantage, let's say, of the colonized populations. So in this sense, decolonization is a knife that cuts both sides, both the colonized population and the colonizing population, and that's why it's very, very important. That's why it touches us, all of us, and doesn't dichotomize us or put us in a binary kind of position.
So it's just a lens through which you look at society and the norm in society, and how we deal with people who deviate from that norm.
No, if you look at it only in terms of deviation, I think you miss the point, because it is in a sense, I could look at it like almost like an analytical tool to understand certain concepts of identity, of being, of personhood, of belonging, of existing in a society, and of the power relations, especially, that are determined by that society. More importantly, who has the authority to speak and who is absolutely erased from this space, this authority to speak. So there's definitely certain valuations that are not necessarily articulated, but they are understood. And in being understood, they impact upon us structurally. We don't even have to talk about them. So it's not a question of the negation. It can be, it's just is. It's just a way that has become a reality and has been embedded in our society for more than, for centuries really, but and continues to impact upon us, not just in our day-to-day interactions with one another, but also institutionally, you know, so we don't even have a say. It just is what it is. Yeah.
Now you've been involved in decolonization for about 4 years. Well, the term decolonization,
Yes.
for about 4 years, but I would argue that it's only become part of the mainstream agenda for about a year, right?
Yes, I have to say that when we started with the term decolonization, we experienced a lot of resistance to it because, you know, many people thought it was very strange. It had nothing to do with our reality. And precisely because they linked it with a geopolitical colonization, you know, that's in the past. We are now in the present. What has that got to do with us? And it took a lot of explaining and a lot of, you know, examples. But decolonization itself is a very interesting term in that it does pave the way to address a lot of issues that were otherwise silenced from other terms that preceded decolonization. And by this, I mean terms like, you know, interculturalism, intraculturalism, multiculturalism, diversity, globalization. All these terms do not encapsulate all the issues that are encapsulated under the term decolonization. For me, decolonization is like, you know, like the 6 blind men that encountered the elephant, and, you know, one of them touched the trunk and thought, oh, an elephant must be a snake. Well, decolonization is the elephant. And when you pick out an issue like structural racism, that's one of them. You pick up white superiority or white privilege, white innocence, the power imbalances, exclusion, trauma. All these are other aspects of the same elephant. So we may give it any other title, but bottom line, we are all dealing with a decolonial process if it is touching on these issues.
Also, sometimes I think you could say the elephant in the room. It's a contentious issue, right? To some people, decolonization is something really worth striving for. For others, it's something they're afraid of, they even vilify.
Yes.
Why do you think it's such a contentious issue?
Well, decolonization, like I said, it is something that, you know, we are very much in a crux of it. For some people, it kind of triggers, well, if I can say, for both parts of the conversation, it triggers very painful memories. If for the colonizers, for example, they are memories of their role that they played in the exclusion, in the extraction, in the stealing, in the hurt, which they do not want to be reminded of, and which stops them from enjoying their nation, their nationhood, and their well-being, and so on. It opens up those old wounds. For the colonized population, exactly the same way, but then in the victimology, in the targeted, in the sufferance that they still continue to have, or they still continue to perpetuate in the immaterial culture that is transferred from generation to generation. So there's a very strong, there's a strong rising research study on generational traumas, on colonization traumas, and even at the moment today, we are starting to see more and more studies on witness trauma. So people who actually do not have any direct, are not directly targeted or excluded, but by virtue of witnessing, they suffer similar symptoms. So decolonization needs to be uncomfortable. It needs to be uncomfortable because it does touch on very painful issues and very painful topics. It is okay for it to be uncomfortable, and it is okay for it to trigger a lot of mixed feelings and mixed responses to it. But the fact remains that it is not ignored. It would be a problem if it was ignored.
Mhm.
It's not ignored. The fact that it is triggering emotions, such passionate emotions, goes even stronger to show how important it is. It is impacting upon us, and we need to walk through this painful path together.
Yeah, and I have a feeling at Ghent University, this conversation, even though it may be painful, is starting. And I think it's important to get hold of this momentum and keep it going. That's why it's so important to have this talk and the one that we're having tomorrow.
Absolutely, absolutely. This week is amazing. This week is amazing. What Ghent has been doing has been amazing. I've been involved with other events going on in Ghent. So I know there is a very strong will to embrace this momentum and to take action. So it's not just a lot of loose talk, cosmetic talk. There's a definite impetus to set up the colonial process in Ghent.
There's an interesting question in the chat asked by Ocean. Now, Ocean, I will come back to you later. The thing is that we built this talk. First, we are going to discuss a few general questions. Then we will talk about the history, the present, and then the future. So we will definitely ask your question about history, how history can play a role in decolonization. Just hang on, I'll just ask one more basic question, and then we'll get to your point. And that is about my basic question. My last basic question is about human rights, because this is the Human Rights Week.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are many connections between decolonization and human rights. Do you think it is two sides of the same coin, or is it, something else with a lot of interconnections? How do you see it?
Well, yeah, like I said, I am fascinated about the whole issue of human rights, but then when we look at the whole concept of human rights, and please do not shoot the messenger, one wants to question what is, are the human rights really human? When the human rights were written out, it was at a time when a whole population were dehumanized. So if they were not under the umbrella of being human, were they really represented in the writing of the human rights? Are they represented now? Isn't it time that human rights is decolonized, that we revisit it and we take into consideration those strategically erased, silenced, ignored, negated, distorted, and even lied upon groups of people who are not represented as human beings under the term human rights. So yeah, it's important to address this human rights in the context of the colonial process, because personally, I'm a strong advocate, a contender for the decolonization of human rights.
I have a question about this, but I didn't prepare it. It may take us too far, so I'll just set 3 minutes aside. This is a concern that I have about human rights. I do appreciate the comment that you have that certain groups of people were seriously disenfranchised when they were written, were ignored, and this is a historical problem. But at a time when the human rights are under pressure, when they're under attack from certain sides, do you think it is risky or dangerous to open that debate even? Do you think we might lose more than we have now if we open the debate on human rights and decolonization? You know what I mean?
Yes, I know, but then I think we are losing out right now if there's a whole category of people who do not feel represented as humans. So it's again trying to cover a festering wound with a little elastoplast. We need to open up that wound, gouge out all that pursy and rotten pieces, and irrigate it and anesthetize it so that it can start to heal. So yes, we will need to look into it. It will be messy, but then it does not have to be messy if we know that for the first time we're going to really sit at the table together. again, the whole concept of who is at the table, who is working together to rewrite these human rights. Because again, if it is the same old processes, then again, we are going to replicate the same problem of structural negation of certain groups of people, or structural dehumanization of certain groups of people. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea is that we are introducing, instead of a universal perspective, we're introducing a pluriversal perspective that will take on various epistemologies, various perspectives into the terminology, into the formulation, and also various voices of authority contributing to what it is, because it is about us. So I think all of us should feel represented as humans.
Now we're starting the bit about facing our history. And we have this question by Ocean. Now, we always envisioned this to be a conversation, not just between the two of us, but also between us and everybody participating.
Absolutely.
So Ocean, I hope you don't mind me asking you, would you mind asking your question live in the Zoom session? Beware, it's being recorded. So if you don't, okay. You don't mind being recorded. That's fine.
No, it's okay. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I think the introduction really paves the way for this reflection. I have a background in history, and I understand how a part of decolonizing our societies is also to acknowledge the responsibility of the construction of our societies, and acknowledge also our colonial legacy in our societies. And I think also we see more and more work from historians to bring in light the voices of oppressed people or oppressed populations in the past. And I was wondering if history could be an important tool also to acknowledge a more collective national or collective history, collective vision of the communities we are living in now, those post-colonial communities we are living in. So that's my first point. And my other question relates with what you just mentioned about the pluriversal aspect of human rights, and how can we bring together those various voices, those various authorities? How can we construct, let's say, a constructive debate and not to replicate the same mistakes from the past? So that's also like the how to make it work. Thank you very much for your answers.
So, no, those are really good questions. Again, it's obviously very important to revisit our histories, because a lot of the historical information, history in itself was written from the perspective of the colonizer. It was written from the perspective of those in power, which means that those who are disenfranchised, those who are disempowered, those who are negated from, were erased automatically from history, or their histories were written from the perspective of then this people in authority. It is very important to revisit history, but personally, I would go even a step further and say not just history, but then transversally on other topics. We need to look into the various, epistemic injustices that have occurred, that have set in motion ways of thinking, whether it's in the sciences or in the humanities. The whole idea of ratio, of learning, of thinking, of being, are predetermined in the whole concept of, let us say, the Cartesian thought of I think and therefore I am. If you just draw from that philosophical, food of thought, then you know that automatically the whole idea of knowledge being ego-centered, knowledge being contextualized to a space, and that is a Western space, ego-centered, that it is an individual that's producing it. That unitary way of thinking is very much the tradition of universities. And we also see that university comes from there. It's a universal. The universe is all centered in I. And I am the source of knowledge. I am objective. Objectivity is all context and person rolled in one. But essentially, it negates the knowledges from let's say the Africans, knowledges from the indigenous people, knowledges from Indians, from Muslims, from Jews, and even worse still, knowledges from women. So it is both Eurocentric and patriarchal. And this needs to be kind of unlearned. It needs to be unpackaged, unlearned. You cannot say, I'm going to add on more information. No, we need to unlearn this information, unravel it, demystify it, so as to relearn what it is. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. There's other interesting questions in the chat. Jonas, I will ask you to intervene in a second. Maybe after the next question, which brings us closer to the university itself. During the summer, and I've listened to some interviews that you gave during the summer about, for example, the position of colonial statues in public spaces. Now, it's not just cities and public spaces that have colonial heritage. Universities have it too. How should we, you think, as a university, deal with our colonial past? The physical relics of that past, but also the history that we have as an institution that participated in colonialism.
You know, universities play a really important role because people look up to it. I mean, many of the great thinkers are embedded in universities. The important thing is to go right back to why a monument. Why do we have a monument? We want to showcase what is important to us, what has impacted upon us, what we want to revere also and pass on as a message throughout to history. So in a sense, the monuments will contribute to our own rewriting of our history. But monuments tend to be frozen. They are a frozen worldview. They represent a certain political, social, cultural, discourse that is stuck in a certain frame of mind, that is stuck in a certain time period. And the presence, therefore, lacks contextualization in today's world, lacks relevance. Moreover, a lot of the monuments at the time, they were constructed or established, especially public monuments, by a certain elite group of people without any consultation with everyone in society. So whom do they represent? What is the purpose of those monuments? This needs to be revisited because many times it was, buddies, cronies, elites just patting each other on the shoulder and, celebrating their own, their own successes in whatever imperialist, adventures that they had performed. At the same time, the same monuments were to silence the proletariat and make them kind of accept that it was done in their honor, it was done on their behalf, even though they were not, the finances, the well-being was not trickling down to the proletariat, was not trickling down to the common man. So the idea is that universities need to revisit these monuments and ask themselves, are they relevant? Are they relevant? Do they have context? Do they have any aesthetic power rather than to perform a propagandist kind of role that reflects where they were conceived, the time that they were conceived, the people who conceived them? Because monuments have got entangled layers of information, and it is the university's role to contribute or to generate or to facilitate counter-narratives that are more contextualized, counter-narratives that are more relevant, trigger these conversations, trigger this new artistic vision or knowledge. For new monuments, there needs to be co-participation, co-creation, and so that it can be relevant and so that it can be represent what the people today, the university, but also whoever it is that it's supposed to represent, it can reflect what is important to them. They can showcase in their monuments. It can be monumentally valuable to them, monumentally relevant to them. These are the conversations that universities need to engage in so that they can contribute towards making monuments relevant.
Yeah. Often these discussions are reduced to condemning historical injustices, condemning historical racism.
Yeah.
And I think it would be a shame if it was left at that. But of course, it's much easier to condemn historical injustices rather than confronting present day racism, institutionalized injustices, etc. How do you see universities today? Are they vestiges of equality of opportunity, or do you see them as strongholds of elitism, of exclusion, or something in between, I would hope?
Well, universities, like I said, are very much linked in that uni kind of way of thinking. So there is for sure room for change. They're not carved on stone. The question to ask ourselves is, would rebranding our universities today be like a forceful repudiation of the universal tradition as it is, or would it be an act of embracing choice, embracing agency, embracing inclusion and participation that would be a microcosmic reflection of the society as it is today? Because in the past, when it was unitary, when it was a university that was perpetuating that Western Eurocentric vision, it was perfectly in tune, perfectly reflective of the society. Well, the society today is not just diverse; it is super diverse. And the university, as is, if it continues to be a university, it does not reflect the multi perspectives that are embedded and that are generated in our super diverse society. So these are conversations that need to be pursued, and I'm very happy to be part of this kind of movement, this momentum. I must say, Ghent University would not be a first. There's no point for Ghent University to start reinventing the wheel when we have got some really, really impressive examples of universities that have already initiated this process. We can learn from one another. That's what learning is all about. We can learn from one another. We can sharpen it and improve it and make it
give a concrete example of a university that has started this process, and what have they done to initiate this process?
Well, I can give you an example of, for example, this year in October, we had our very first PhD student, Moteo Koitiwe, who had a PhD in indigenous astronomy, and he based it completely on indigenous knowledge systems of the Botswana astronomy. Northwest University in South Africa is one of the universities that has really embraced this decolonial process and has even got certain courses like indigenous knowledge systems is actually accredited, because you don't just give a lecture, but you accredit it. You accredit it and make sure that it is acknowledged internationally as a viable university course. It's one of the first to do this, but it's not the only one. We also have other universities, like, for example, I mean, if I can just give an example of the University of Southern California, that has got also incredible changes, that has inserted incredible, and this has not been a long time, it's a very new move, the colonial strategy for dismantling systemic racism. So, for example, they've created an official and credited position and role of a professor who is supposed to offer expertise and to offer hands-on knowledge on how to decolonize the university. There is an office that is funded, that has got access to a whole pool of information, whose role is to monitor and to make sure that there is a decolonial process. What is then this decolonial process? To make sure that there is intersectionality is guaranteed, to consult with the faculty heads, the college deans, the student organization, the employee system, the committee of employees, what it comprises of, what are the criteria for employing, what are the representations in each faculty of staff members and so on, but also to launch an anti-racism website, but not just an anti-racism website, but one that is also collecting resources, an information database, showcasing narratives and witness accounts, data mining, community involvement, training resources, posting about tools and links, and also listings of other information that can be used within the context of, but besides that, it should also be a place where you can highlight events like conferences, conversations, just as this one's, master classes, training, and ongoing training. So it is broad. I could go on and on and on. I can write all this for you so that you can see, or you can go to their website and see some of the things that they are doing, which are quite impressive. But I feel that if a university wants to engage in a decolonial process, they need to do more than just lip service. Yeah. They need to know that it involves really getting into the nitty-gritty, get an office to do it, get involved with it. It has to touch transversally on all faculties. They have to be involved in decolonizing themselves. It's not just a humanitarian issue or a historical issue or a social or cultural issue. It's transversal. It cuts across all, and for this you need an office that is going to be able to monitor all these procedures, that is going to work horizontally but also vertically with the students, involving the students in all this expertise, that is going to recognize the remuneration and financial valuation of the contribution of these students, because some of them would like, with the best intention of the world, to participate, but their expertise is not valued, you know. So there needs to be certain valuation of the community involvement, the training resources, the expertise by students, because this, without the students, the university is not. You cannot have a university full of professors. You need the students, and a lot of changes have been initiated precisely by this mobility of the students. So, you know, bravo to Umoja students for initiating whatever they're initiating. I'm proud of that. We need to hear these voices, but we need these voices responded to structurally. That's how a university can start decolonizing, in my opinion.
I think this answer that you gave about how every single process really in the university needs to be under consideration, including research and what we consider to be good research, offers us a good segue to Jonas's question. Jonas, if you wouldn't mind asking your question.
Yes, hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the interesting conversation. I was just wondering, as you said, the knowledge is also subject to processes of colonization, especially from the West. So I was wondering how we develop these processes in research, and especially in particular the role of Western researchers doing research in the Global South, the inherent colonial relationship that exists there. How do we develop decolonization processes there, and what does this mean for the position of the researcher and their research in general? Thank you.
Okay, that's a really good question. I think it's really important to revisit the various epistemic injustices that have occurred over the ages, and to acknowledge the impact of these epistemic injustices and what role they have played in shaping research, in shaping the analytical tools that we use, in shaping the conceptual framework that we work with. In addressing these epistemic injustices today, we will then find a way to embrace or to open up to new forms of knowledge. Who is the knower, and how can we allow certain erased knowers, erased authorities to then take center stage and be heard, or to be heard in a different way. Also, that there are so many other ways of knowing, some of them that are not even, what do you call it? it's not possible to, they have not been recorded because they are not open to articulation. They are inarticulatable and yet have an impact in the shaping and the forming of a society. These are things to understand, that the Western perception of knowledge and knowledge consumption, knowledge production, and knowledge distribution is not the only way to perform knowledge. So coupled with this question, I will just like to add on that an important thing to even consider, an important aspect to consider, is monuments that that we perhaps don't even know are monuments, stalwart monuments. Many people look at physical monuments out in the street, or maybe in terms of statues, and they think, okay, yeah, that's a monument. Some of these monuments, we see them, we don't see them. Then we say, okay, they are invisible. But there are also other monuments that are literally invisible, but that are very, very visible. And one of them is language. Believe me, that is a colonial monument that is so stuck in our world today, that is in our face, and that is that really needs to be dismantled, much more than all the other physical monuments that we have seen. So there is a very urgent, a very important need to start reviewing our terminologies, because the terminology frames the context in which we are in, frames the content in which we are pursuing, frames the research, frames the knowledge that we are perpetuating and upon which we are basing our research. So these are all, I hope, ways in which I hope I've answered your question somehow. Yeah.
Rosella had a question related to Jonas's question. So if you wouldn't mind, Rosella?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. I think that in part my question was already answered too, but I still don't fully understand how it is possible. Like, if we still keep the university as it is, also in how it is called, then how can we embed or incorporate these new epistemological approaches that were mentioned before? So how can we do this practically? And if this is really possible, if the institutional, the structural interpretation of the university is kept as it is, because I see many conversations in which universities should embrace this diversity or decolonization approach, but keeping their essence. And I don't think that it's possible to reach this end point if the entire maybe structure is not questioned. So yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you. That's a good question indeed. Yeah, it's also like one of the questions that was raised when, one of the greatest critique that was raised concerning the Africa Museum, where some people were like, shouldn't we just, start from scratch and build a new museum that we can then call Africa Museum, because the other is so drenched in coloniality, so drenched in a colonial history that it is virtually impossible to fully decolonize it, to even start to imagine that it can be decolonized. In the same way, indeed, university, like I say, the term uni is very much embedded in that Cartesian school of thought. How can we change? We cannot throw away the bathwater with the baby still in it. The baby is still very healthy. It still is an institution of learning. And precisely because it is an institution of learning, it can rebrand itself. It is capable. It has got capable minds who can rebrand. If there is a will, then there should be a way. But it has to be more than just lip service. There has to be a real follow through towards creating an office that will monitor it. Like I said earlier, when talking about the procedure that went through in the University of South California, but then there are other universities which I don't know right now, but then this is the university, and they can do this. But also, like in South Africa, they started with dismantling all these statues, roads must go, and so on. But then there are more and more universities in South Africa. I think there's even a decolonial university, if I'm not wrong, which is following your suggestion. So that's a university that's precisely all about decolonization. That exists, I think, in South Africa. But we are not, we are academics. And we can do this. We can rebrand. We can unlearn so as to relearn, and we can, unpack the knowledge systems and create new channels. Work within So it's also then important for the university to engage itself, because to engage itself in some of the difficulties that are facing civil society when it comes to colonization. We have all seen that this theme is important. So I think it's important that universities start working on performance indicators so that they can create indicators that are calculable, that can be used, that can be used to essentialize and to even calculate the value, to evaluate decolonization. Performance indicators is a very time-consuming research, and it should be multidisciplinary. But it has got such a valuable impact in terms of policy formulation beyond the university, in terms of advocacy, in terms of real statistical valuation of, is there a decolonial process busy? What level have we reached? What ideas can merge in, can come in, and so on? It's one of the suggestions that can be. So the university plays an important role also in linking up, in voicing some of the issues, because they've got the minds, but they can no longer detach from these issues. They've got the possibilities to play a very important role in thinking with civil society, in advocating or lobbying with the decision makers, in helping with the proper formulation of policy, because this is the mouthpiece of society. This is what I feel that universities can do than just lip service.
This actually, thank you, Rosella, for your question. But your answer, Nyanchama, brings me back to a discussion that we were actually having yesterday, and I do want to touch on it again, because you brought it up, the policy perspective, the performance indicators. Maybe it's because I don't have the imagination for it, but don't you think that if you have if you have performance indicators, if you want to quantify the effect of your policy, don't you think you'll have to work with categorizing your demographics, with counting certain groups of people, labeling them, if you will? Isn't that at odds with the very thing that you aim to strive against?
Yeah, but that's the thing with performance indicators. Have you ever done research on performance indicators?
Probably not your way.
This is what I did during my master's, and well, that was more than 35 years ago. Yeah, sorry, excuse my age. But it's not about labeling. It's really very qualitative research, very open-ended questions, and like I said, very time-consuming. You know, at that time, I did a research on performance indicators in education at the university, at the Free University of Brussels, and from, I don't know, more than 200 questions, I managed to come up with 3 performance indicators. You know, after doing my research was 2 years long, but I came up with 3 good performance indicators. So it's not about it. The whole compact to the indicator is not a label. The indicator is not a label. It's precisely what I've said, an indicator, but it's an indicator that can be quantified, because you've done enough research to show that this particular indication is supported by this particular number of or percentage in society. So it can be presumed to be a valid indicator of this particular performance, you know? So it's not a labeling as such, but in order for it to be a good indicator, it has to be spread out wide. It has to be multidisciplinary, and it has to be, if possible, working in conjunction with probably partners in other universities so that it can really fully be representative or reflective of society. And for such a big and broad research, civil society is totally incapable of doing it without the support of our big brother and big sister in the university.
Now, Ghent University, like I think most societal actors who want to honestly engage in diversity with the best intentions, they use labels and they count groups and they try to do better with the best intentions, but I can sense that this is clearly not a policy that you would condone, right?
No, I'm not a fan of labels. I'm not a fan of labels. Labels are, again, a very very Eurocentric, very patriarchal, very imperialistic way of approaching research. You need to categorize them into little, you know, but what is then the label? It only makes it easier for the administrator, for the researcher, but it is not representative of those being labeled. It is not at all reflective of it does not cover the whole wide range of heterogeneity that the label pretends to cover. And in this way, it's misleading. Statistics are essentially misleading, you know, especially if they are hanging on to these labels. Labels are fraught with misconception and misunderstanding, and can be very, very misleading. I am not a fan of labels. No.
I apologize to the audience for this little detour. Let's get back on track now. But thank you, Nyanchama, for indulging me. Now, this is piggybacking on the question that Rosella asked about to what extent should we really engage in decolonizing our universities. This is a question that I thought of in conjunction with Sibo Kanobana, a good friend of mine. And then this is actually a question that was inspired by him. What do you think would happen if we were to really and truly, like you say, decolonize universities? We've seen in the past that democratization efforts may have had an impact on institutions that reduces their societal status.
Yeah.
Do you think if we were to really decolonize universities, would they lose their societal power, their societal status, the way they have it now?
There is, of course, that danger. And again, there are several authors who've written about this downside to you know, the extreme essentializing of decolonization. But then again, I go back to if it is indeed initiated in co-participation, in co-creation, then where is that downside? There needs to be, because at some point it is not it's not a dichotomous binary, contention between we and them. It becomes a we story, and when it is a we story, then it is completely supported for the we, by the we, in function of the we who we are. So I think it becomes a problem when we do not unpack ourselves. We do not unlearn those kind of universalizing, what do you call it? Hierarchical kind of tendencies that were embedded that are embedded in the universal way of thinking. A pluriversal way of thinking does indeed entertain and engage and embed itself in various, and it respects that various people do have a voice of authority and can engage on an equal basis in the conversation. So I believe very strongly. I believe very strongly that there is, for a good and successful decolonial process, it has to be linked up with a process of, unlearning what was, unlearning what was, so as to relearn what is. It's together. It's just intertwined. It's intertwined, and in this way, people then would gird against that that idea of let's say the idea of, when you have got all this super diversity, then there is no authority, there is no nation state, there is no structure. That structureless, kind of rudderless way of going about things is also in itself, a failure of society. I think that that is not ever going to happen if people are working together, and people are really embracing the whole, these concepts of co-participation, co-creation, and working towards and acknowledging the value of multiple contexts of knowledge and multiple sources of knowledge. Yeah.
It's 10 to 12, and I do want to include questions from the chat. So I hope you don't mind. This takes us in a slightly different direction. This question by Matthias. It really is. It goes back to human rights, which isn't a bad thing since this is the Human Rights Week.
Yeah.
Matthias, if you wouldn't mind asking your question live.
Yes. Hey. Thank you, first of all, for everything that you've been saying, because it's just truly amazing and truly like, yes, yes, yes. And earlier on, when you were talking about the human rights, you said something about don't shoot the messenger. But I actually just want to have more from the messenger, and I really want to hear your opinion about what I'm about to ask, which is sort of human rights do, given even their name, they do center the human, and so they're very individualistic in nature. And you were saying earlier that creates a problem of who's human, who's not human. And of course, that's a big problem. But I think there's also another problem, which is the fact that because they so emphasize on humans and interpersonal relations, they sort of allow you to very easily overlook intergroup dynamics and structural problems. And so because you put the focus on the individual and not the group. And I know now within human rights, there's sort of this, they're trying to have this third generation rights, I believe. So we're looking for group dynamics to be included in the human rights framework. But even then, I do feel like they're inherently individualistic. And so I wanted to really just ask your opinion on whether should we then let go of human rights as a framework, or do you still have hope that actually we might still use human rights, given that they focus on the individual and then allow us to overlook intergroup dynamics?
That's a really good question, especially me being an African and me being such a proponent of Ubuntuism. It's actually my guiding principle as a Pan-Africanist and Afro-feminist. But yeah, there are certain developments in today's world that can be value added towards the whole human rights movement. One of them is, of course, what you have brought up yourself, but then the whole idea of the dehumanized categories of people, and how can we then include them? Should we get rid of human rights as a concept? Is it obsolete, and so on? Again, we go back to bathwater and the baby. Okay, the bathwater is filthy. Oh my God, is it filthy? But the baby is healthy. I mean, there's a baby right there. So we need to still, just the same advice I gave about universities, that in order for the human rights to really be representative or microcosmically reflective of the people who were in the past dehumanized or disenfranchised or misrepresented or absolutely erased from human rights, there needs to be a process of unpacking those errors, unpacking those injustices, unlearning those injustices so as to relearn, so as to include. And the inclusion should not be somebody taking the mic and speaking speaking for the voiceless. Oh God, I hate that. Let those without a voice speak in their own voice. Let there be a greater participation at the table. Let there be more redistribution of the authority to speak. Who has got the ultimate voice of authority in determining what is a human right and what is not, you know? So there has got to be multiplicity in that as well. And so yeah, there's definitely work that needs to be done. It is not yet perfect, but I do not propose throwing it out altogether. I propose that, you know, the bathwater is filthy, you know, so when we throw out the bathwater, we can, you know, we should remember that the baby is still there, and the baby is okay. It's all right, doing okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Nyanchama, before we close today, is there something that we haven't quite touched upon that you would like to say before we close the session?
Ooh. Oh my God, no. Oh, there's so much I want
know,
to say.
right?
I don't know where to start, so I'm not going to start because definitely I will go over my time limit. I can only say that this theme is really, really, really important. Let's take time to read about it. Let's take time to inform ourselves about it. Let's take time to even ask, you know, whichever experts to inform ourselves on what we can practically do to actually initiate a decolonial process. I am not, and I'm not an expert. I get my well, I guess I am, but I get my information also from other experts. We learn from other experts who have been in the field, who have been doing this. So do the same, inform yourselves, learn about it, because this is a very beautiful and effective analytical tool, a conceptual framework upon which lots of researchers can take a completely new direction, you know, if we embrace it well. Remember the elephant and the blind man. Don't forget the elephant, and don't make it a pink elephant in the room.
That's wonderful. Now, clearly we've just touched the surface. We haven't even really touched the surface. So if you would like to know more about this, please, first of all, you may want to check the program of the Human Rights Week. I just sent it in the chat. So please download it, check it, because there's events for the rest of the week. I've also added to the chat a link to a roundtable taking place tomorrow with more Nyanchama, but of course not only Nyanchama, because it is a roundtable. We will also have Imanis Salmi, Bella Manirambona, Ilse de Vos, Badra Jaid, and Giselle Corradi participating in the roundtable. It takes place tomorrow, Wednesday, from 2 to 3 p.m. So please, if you do want to register for that, please do. It will be in Dutch. I just want to thank you, Nyanchama. This has been a pleasure to talk with you, and I really hope that we can keep the conversation. I hope you will all join me in the chat in thanking Nyanchama for being here with us today. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. I hope you're going to save the chat, because I've not been reading it. And if there's anybody who has got follow-up questions, they can always send them to me, maybe via you, Bart, and I'll be happy to respond to any follow-up questions that people might have.